So, if you made it this far in these little video entries, I applaud you. If they made little to no sense to you, don't worry. This is kind of the more absurd part of where I come at tackling this issue of nihilism and how to really overcome and get out of the rut of nihilistic thinking and tendencies. So a lot of my explanations and a lot of the rooting it in the civilizational norm seems a bit convoluted, but the reality is we are beings that reflect and kind of refract our own internalized nature onto the external environment through what we create and what we have been put through and adapted from. In a way, human beings are always reflexively echoing shadows of past experiences and living in a kind of cyclical loop of past adaptations that is always playing out in this world. Our very nature of moving into this more automaton-esque formality of existing the way we do in culture and society, which is, from the outside looking in, absolutely absurd. It is less than human. In fact, it is very subhuman how we actually exist and go about our lives, at least in the West. I mean, a lot of modernity is to blame for that. We live like machines. We literally exist like androids. We don't actually exist in a way that is conducive to our own health. We basically perform functions and tasks and then sequester ourselves away in our home as if we were a broom or a vacuum cleaner being put in a closet. And the commodification and amenities that we have allotted to us in our homes basically act as a way of just emptying the dustbin by supplying us the things that we need basically to guarantee our survival and the ability to replenish our system and continue to wake up and do the same thing over and over again repeatedly the next day. So it comes as no surprise when I really give this statement and this observation about nihilism and its nature itself. Nihilism kind of is the extension and the overall synopsis of what modernity produces, because in reality, modernity, when observed through the lens and perspective of, let's say, symbolism, is the story of our entire intrinsic fear of the human experience itself. It is the man in the box. It is the voice inside the mind that echoes into the infinite and does not receive any answer other than its own calling out for something more. And that's what's absurd about nihilism, is it stems and comes from seeing a world like this, as absurd as a world as this is. Because let's be honest, the world is quite absurd. The world is absolutely bizarre. It's ran and organized and governed by members of this species that fundamentally put themselves into roles and play personas and characters that interact in a world that actually has very little circumstantial hold on their actions, yet the rest of us are held accountable and basically shackled to a set of rules and parameters and decrees by these very individuals who are no different than we are. They just basically were put in a position to play a given part. And that's the funny thing, is it is quite absurd when you look at it for what it is. Reality itself is absurd. We don't even question the fact that there were things that existed before us, and there's going to be things that probably outlive and exist after us. That there are probably circumstances that explain how the very structures and anatomical layout and the ability to even process thoughts came from nature or the world or consciousness in the first place. All these things leave more questions than answers, and that's what's curious, is that our brain is always overwhelmed by the fact that it's asking for reasons as to why, and our brain demonstrates through that very questioning itself where the pathology of its evolution stem from: curiosity and awe and inspiration and a very childlike wonder at the mystery of being and existing itself. Yet how quickly it turned into an existential, well, I mean, not quickly, we've had millions of years of development, but how quickly that awe turned into an existential gripping fear of the absurdity of life and existence in this world itself, because the question was turned upon itself. The absurd thing of life is not the fact that it is a mystery that seemingly exists with no real indicator of what is actually true, although beliefs and ideals and philosophies and different teachings will all claim to be true. In reality, nobody can really say for certain. But one thing that holds true, regardless of all of these things, is the simple observation that you exist. You are, and you persist and exist in this state of being itself, which fundamentally implicates and indicates that there is no such thing as non-existent. And that gets into the very absurd question that often frightens people and starts nihilism in the first place, is why then? Why is there existence? Why is there such thing as death? Well, if you really observe and look at nature and see that everything is cyclical, you would understand, or at least kind of grasp, not conceptually, but kind of get a kind of intuitive underpinning and leaning into the way that our thoughts are structured and the way that life transpires and changes over various seasons and cycles on this planet, then maybe death itself is nothing more than a season and a cycle. Maybe it is a transitory state, and maybe this one formality of existing in a tangible, physical formality of being is just that. It is transitory and temporary. Maybe this given circumstance isn't all that there is. And maybe that's what breaks the fundamental spell and illusion of nihilism and a nihilistic world like the one that we find ourselves in. Maybe what is special and unique about this world is the fact that we feel all the experiences that we do, the good and the bad, and we see them as wholly and solely divided and divisive in their nature. We try to run from so much, just like our minds try to chase and seek answers, only ever getting more questions. We run from the very essence of nature itself, and because we're always running, we never stop to really consider or ponder or just even take a breath and exist, and really see that all we're ever doing is letting our minds run wild, and our minds all the while are just creating a story. Our minds all the while, and all this thinking and all this pondering, are just creating another story in an infinite potential capacity of other stories. Yes, these religions all exist. Yes, the Knights of the Round Table exist. Yes, your life and my life exist. Yes, the goings on in the world exist. And yes, also Star Wars exists. Yes, also Elden Ring exists. Yes, also to the current NFL season and the continuum of events in WWE and all these things exist simultaneously. This is what to grasp. This is the only thing to grasp and understand, really, that I've come to realize is life is nothing but absurdity. It is completely contradictory. It is a endless cycle of events and circumstances with seemingly no real connection other than the fact that they stem and underpin from the capacity to create circumstance. And maybe that's what's intrinsically unique about the human experience is it's all about just creating circumstances. We've become lost in the storytelling, though. And that's the issue, is we're trying to puzzle piece together what we think is a grandiose question, but life is not a riddle to be solved. It's an experience to be had. It's a story to play out and a story that you create and are in the circumstance of creating. You are in the seats and the helm of your own capacity that comes with both a tremendous amount of responsibility and a tremendous amount of gratitude to be had for that circumstance, because life is wholly and totally just a concoction of whatever you can basically imagine. But we subscribe so much value to what we consider to be normal and normalcy that often we take for granted that life is completely and totally absurd. And there isn't really a fundamental pinning or underpinning of what constitutes reality, save for one